scouting in the draft from prospect Jaden McDaniels, who was really interesting. The three in rim protection archetype is talked about and is really rare and important in today's NBA. And Jaden is a good example of one that really worked out. His ground coverage and rim protection instincts were awesome in college. Watch him swoop in all the way from the top of the key here for this really impressive block. The speed and the ground coverage was so impressive back in college. He was really good moving all around the floor, covering multiple rotations. That's another ridiculous sprint down block. And he was great covering ground. He was so fast, could move down onto the block in this Washington zone, and he showed really great instincts for rim protection as well. He was just really, really important for that defense in terms of destroying and like covering space, where Jaden could start a play sunk down, helping hard on a post player and sprint out to close out hard on a shooter. This was the stuff that he did, and despite some real awareness issues, which are common for most freshmen and not something I really focus on unless they're really bad, he turned himself into an all-defense player pretty quickly. Again, these same kind of ridiculous monster primary rim rotations where he comes over from the weak side and swats plays with ease. He's even defending in drop a little bit. He is the big man here, and he is dropping back. Great mobility as well, just in a different way than sliding at the point of attack or rotating. He tracks back and blocks this shot beautifully. His length, his verticality, his timing, all league caliber, and he should probably have been first team all defense this year, and certainly probably will be at some point in his career with these tools. And he's no slouch at the point of attack either, as he's shown the ability to slide with a lot of really impressive players. Here he takes away Halliburton's drive, swallows this jumper up for a really nice block. Jaden's rim protecting and movement kind of skills as a real 6'8 to 6'10 kind of guy is a super valuable archetype in a pace and space league where you need guys who can protect the rim and cover ground at the same time. And that's exactly what Jaden McDaniels brought as a prospect. But the interesting thing came with his offense, where I was pretty low in, or not really low, I was like lower on Jaden than I would have been, I think, now. And his offense had a lot of problems. He was in a really high usage role at Washington where he was asked to create. Remember, he was a 5-star freshman once compared to Kevin Durant, but his handle and his burst and mostly his strength were really lacking. He was so easily bumped off the ball there, fell over, and lost his handle, and his decision-making was just generally really problematic in terms of, again, trying to drive baseline here into tight space, losing the ball, and turning it over. This was pretty common for Jaden when he tried to attack as a sort of primary offensive threat. There were some flashes of handling capability, like this beautiful little side cross pull-up jumper, whatever, and he had flashes of shooting pull-up threes as well, even though that was not really part of his game and still isn't. But I think the usage point was key in his projection, as Jaden in college posted a 25 usage, really high. A ton of his shots were, especially inside the arc, were unassisted. That Washington team didn't really have any guards that were spectacular, and he had to really make a lot for himself. Whereas in the NBA, we see his usage is 15, 16 or lower, which has made a big difference, obviously, in his efficiency and in his general style of play, where Jaden's functional strength improvement is really remarkable, as now you see him be able to like bully smaller and weaker defenders with his strength and fluidity. He's not perfect, and there's a reason Jaden is still like a complimentary offensive player generally, as he doesn't have the dynamic handle or athletic tools to win off of the dribble and create advantages consistently. And you still kind of see those decision-making issues when Jaden puts the ball on the floor and isn't able to really score. You see he's really, really bothered by this Covington dig, doesn't have the handling awareness to kick out, ends up taking and missing that shot as well. But in an off-ball attacking role, Jaden has thrived, where attacking a closeout off of a drive, he's capable dribbling, and that is a beautiful Euro step as well. So much more controlled and like pace than he was in college. Obviously a great spacer at this point, really great off-ball shooter, some light movement, mostly catch and shoot stuff, but really, really effective spacing the floor for Minnesota. And that has turned him into one of the more valuable role players in the league. And calling him a role player at this point might be a little bit disingenuous, as he's like a legit all-league defensive talent with secondary offensive capabilities in terms of shot making, some closeout attacking, a little bit of passing as well. And all this was like definitely seeable at Washington, as in a smaller role, a lot of his major weaknesses kind of went away or just aren't as prevalent. And that's something I've tried to consider in my analysis a lot more in the last 3 or 4 years since his draft, is how important like usage and context and role is. And there are a couple prospects in this draft that could be really impressive 3 and rim protector guys. And the main one that I think of is Taylor Hendricks, UCF freshman, who we actually have one more Jaden McDaniels clip. Enjoyed this pull up mid range that I forgot about before. But Taylor Hendricks is the main like Jaden McDaniels acolyte. They're definitely different prospects. I would say Hendricks' offense is certainly worse, as we're going to get into this stat query I have right here, but we're going to look at Hendricks' usage and general like role and volume numbers here, as Hendricks was lower usage than Jaden by a good margin, and many more of his shots from 3 and from inside the arc were assisted rather than him creating those shots for himself. On tape, the 3s were mostly like catch and shoot. He's a good catch and shoot guy, again, which we'll get into, and he can space the floor pretty reliably. Some light movement here. He can face up. This is the wonkiest step back 3 you'll ever see. And he's comfortable like simple slips, pick and pops into a 3, which is most of what he needs. But part of the reason I'm a little more skeptical of Hendricks than many are, I think he's more of a late lottery type talent than like a top 7 type talent. And part of that is because of the offense, where Jaden McDaniels had similar decision-making problems, but in a much higher usage role and with more flashes of creation ability. Whereas those flashes are much fewer and far between for Taylor, where his handle's really weak and he'll often drive himself into bad spots and struggle when he has to attack a closeout, and he really struggles to generate separation and make good decisions as a driver, which, as an off the catch attacker, is so important, as we saw with Jaden. Generally, the ball control is pretty weak. Again, this was a problem with Jaden for sure, which is super fixable, I think. But Hendricks, again, is just one to lose the ball on his handles quite a bit, probably more than he should be. As you'd hope for, like a real closeout attacker, because if he can get there, the defense is fantastic, probably even better than Jaden McDaniels was as a prospect. And Hendricks is incredible swooping in from the weak side for rotate down blocks like this. He covers so much ground and space as a backline defender, just like we saw with McDaniels. As if a team runs a spread pick and roll with Hendricks anywhere in the vicinity, the big man has to watch out, or there's a real risk that Hendricks will react on time, use his speed, movement skills, length, explosion to get up and block that shot. This is wildly impressive rim pro for a freshman. We see him just kind of sitting back here as a primary paint defender. He's the last line of defense here, and he rises up and swats that shot like super easily. And we see Hendricks, just like Jaden, cover a ton of space. He's able to cover a lot of court in not that many strides. Let's count the steps here from basically a 3-point line. 1, 2, maybe 3 steps, and a wonderful block. And this kind of defensive stuff, the defensive playmaking, he's a solid point of attack defender, but nothing crazy. But this rim protection is such a valuable skill, as we saw with Jaden McDaniels. And that's what makes Taylor a really interesting guy to take in the top 10 for a team that really, needs that defensive ceiling. It's an archetype that can fit on basically any team. And that's why I'm high on all of the guys in this archetype. And they're pretty rare, as we can see. But this draft has a couple, like I said. Noah Clowney is the other big one, where he has some similar skills to Hendricks, but is a little more of a big defender probably, where his mobility is also really impressive. But he has some wing defense tools too, where Clowney is probably a little more active than Hendricks as like a nail defender. He's really good digging and disrupting, and look at him rotate down to cover that ground. He is just a wildly impactful defender for one of the youngest players in the draft. He's really good moving, changing directions. I love his lift on the move here, as Clowney is able to stay in stride with his cutter and lift for a block. Great timing without like losing speed or fouling or getting out of position or anything. It's just really, really impressive stuff. I think I accidentally put this clip twice, but it's a great clip, so we're going to watch it again. Block. This is really high-level defensive stuff, and Clowney isn't as good of a defender as Hendricks for sure, but I don't see the gap between them as big as many do. His offense is maybe a little better, where Clowney is certainly more, or at least is different. Clowney is more of a big, where he's more comfortable rolling. Shout out to, I think, College Basketball Scouting for these clips. Great account with really good, and he's a bit better at handling, a bit better at finishing on the move. And the shooting is going to be the big question, as Clowney has some good shooting indicators, as we'll see in a second with the volume, but he wasn't really good from three this year. So that spacing is obviously super key for this role, and one of the main reasons he's below Hendricks as a prospect. But if we look at guys who block shots, take a lot of threes, and are tall and young, it is a good list. There's a lot of stars here, obviously. Ingram and, Jaren Jackson, PG. I think Jabari could be a star, as well as Keegan. Jaden's on that list, of course. We have some role players, like I think Kess is going to be good. Santi Aldama could be good. But when we look at Noah Clowney, his indicators are interesting, because he did not shoot well from three at all, and he didn't take a lot of far twos, and he wasn't a great free throw shooter. So this is going to be a real test of like the volume here, is how important is just the big guy taking threes, as volume is really important, as I've talked about plenty on this channel and before, whereas Hendricks has that volume, as well as, excuse me, let me spell that right, has that volume, as well as, he shot well, he's a better free throw shooter, he took more long twos, and overall it's just a better shooting bet than Clowney, which makes him, a better prospect, because the three part of that is so important. All of like the best teams, it seems like, has one of these guys, like the Nuggets and Aaron Gordon. Obviously the Wolves have one with Jaden. The Celtics are a rare team that got their like 3 and rim pro from guards and guys like Derek White and Marcus Smart. The Lakers and we see the Lakers as a good example of someone with D and no three, in Jared Vanderbilt, who is a phenomenal defender who couldn't play at times in the playoffs because of his lack of spacing ability, which is going to be key for Clowney and Hendricks, of course. As the upside, I think, for both of them is really, really high. Hendricks especially because of the shot making and the defensive profile too, as he's a better athlete, longer, can cover more ground, as a real guy with all league defensive upside with a complementary offensive skill set. And in a draft loaded with talent, I think that's a guy who I would be okay with the team taking in the top 6 or 7, even if I don't necessarily have him ranked there on my board. But it's going to be really interesting to see how these guys end up faring in the league, and how valuable their skill set is and how much it translates, because as is, I think Clowney and Hendricks are underrated and could be two of the more valuable defense-offense role players in the league at some point, and those are really valuable and guys worth drafting pretty high.